Because I think we're more of a podcast than a
Yeah.
TV show,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but we're a podcast with pixels.
That should be your new slogan. Podcast with pixels.
Podcast with pixels. Welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to train your eye so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you are wondering who we are to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dances. She has about 21 years. I have about 23. And that being said, we're talking about level changes today.
Mwahaha. It is also our 37th episode and our final episode of the year 2020.
Yes, so Merry Christmas. Also, if you didn't notice, there's
Yes.
a bunch of Christmas things up by my head.
I love the snowmen. Snowmen are so cute. We will be back with another live episode on January 7th. Can't believe I'm saying those words. What is happening? Is there anything you want to say about level changes before we dive into the sharing the video?
Yeah, there's actually two things that I want to say. The first is that level changes don't have to be like extremely dramatic. Like you don't have to go from like standing to squatting for it to be a level change and make things more dynamic. It can really just be like a small bend of the knees, and that will, change that level, but it makes it more dynamic than just all one level, really. And the second thing I wanted to say was that Kellese is somebody that dances with her legs bent a lot. There's not a ton of times that you will see her dance with straight legs, except for like when she's taking a step forward sometimes. And that's something that makes her so great at doing level changes. When you are working with straight legs, it makes it a lot harder for you to break that line and then do a change of level. So dancing with bent legs can make that a lot easier. And so Kellese definitely is somebody that does that, and she does a great job of it. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, Cassie.
I don't think so. But tonight, as you can probably tell, is a video with Kellese Key and Jordan Frisbee. I am going to drop the link to the video in the chat. Go ahead and give it a watch, then come back and we will get to analyzing. To the screen share. So as they start this dance, they have some really subtle level changes through their starter step that I really enjoy. Like incredibly subtle. And particularly with Kellese, she drives a lot of her dancing from her hips and her pelvis. From what the terminology she uses when she teaches is the cookie. I both love and hate that terminology, but it gets the job done. I will say that.
Yeah,
it does. So this roll right here, I like. She drives up from a plied position into more straight legs, and then it ripples up through the body. So technically, it was a level change going upwards, but a really subtle and dynamic one that I really appreciate. And I think you wanted to say something about it too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you can watch because she starts out with flat feet, and she like slowly raises up further onto her toes and into a straight leg, which is what you just said. So we're watching here. She has a fairly straight leg, but as soon as she is starting her rotation, she's starting to soften the knees and bend into them. So it's not a really noticeable level change, but there is a level change. She is sinking down just a little bit. And you can kind of see it a little bit more when she gets to the point where her and Jordan are more sideways to the camera audience, whatever you want to call it.
I'll get there. There we go.
Yeah, right here. You can really see that bend in the leg.
They're actually so perfectly nested together.
I know.
It's very satisfying.
She also has some like leaning forward going on as she comes through that. So right here, she's upright, fine. as we're coming through here, she's starting to lean forward a little bit, and that also creates some level change. Very minor, but it does change the level.
Yep. And she's doing that to connect her ribs into Jordan's right hand.
Yeah.
So this song has that signature da 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 da, kind of 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yes.
And do you like my karaoke?
This is great.
You're welcome. The way Jordan styles it is by going up onto the balls of both feet and kind of changing weight back and forth and shimmying his shoulders just a tiny bit. It's a really subtle level change, but it matches the tone of that moment in the music really well. And then I think you wanted to talk about 2 things in here, so I'll just let you take over.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say basically the same thing about Jordan is, he has that great level change. And I love that he not only has a level change, but he is making it a little bit more dynamic with some extra movement to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, I wanted to look at Kellese because she actually does something as well. She goes from a flat foot, and then she kind of raises up as he's doing that as well. So we're starting out here, flat foot. That left foot is planted. The right foot is skimming the ground, but there's not any weight on it. It doesn't matter.
That little detail of how after she finishes pivoting, she lets her weight shift to the heel of her left foot and then goes into turnout. Really subtle, but I love that detail.
Yeah.
And I also really appreciate how she's letting Jordan really have this moment, and then she adds to it afterwards.
Yeah. And what she does is she kind of pulls that free right foot up underneath her to help just make that change easier for her. So if you were to just leave the foot back and raise up with the heel of the left foot that she was planted on, it wouldn't be super obvious, but because she brings that foot in underneath her, there is some extra space, some extra room for movement. And so it not only brings her up, but it pitches her a little bit differently as well. And then we have that change going back down into those bent knees. Yeah. An extra thing I want to add about bent knees, it's great for, unexpected things and adjusting. The only thing with it is that there is a way that you can do it that does not hurt your knees, and there's a way that you can do it that does. So a lot of times what happens is that people will rely on the balance point of the knee and not use the thigh muscle. So you're just having that weight rather than actually activating the thigh muscle. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, it takes a lot of the pressure off of that knee joint.
Yeah. And specifically you're referring to the quadricep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A really great way to practice that actually is to learn how to moonwalk and then practice moonwalking, because in order to glide on that one foot, on the ball of your foot, you need to have a really stable knee and a really engaged quadricep. Mm-hmm. So it's good for your strength and also good for your dancing, because everyone should know how to moonwalk.
Yep.
It hurts your brain for the first few weeks, but then you get it and you can whip it out at parties when we can have parties again.
Right.
All right. Is there anything more you want to say about this section?
I don't think so. But Andrew said Courtney is big on learning to moonwalk. I did not know that. But.
Oh, sweet. I love Courtney. She was someone I trained a lot with when I was first really getting serious about my West Coast swing. And one of the things that I really appreciated that she taught me was how there are 2 ways to cognitively think about rolling through your feet. One is the one that is kind of like the common one we get all the time, where the toe hits the ground first, then you roll to the ball, then to the heel. And then when you pick up the foot, you pick up the heel, then the ball, then the toe. And you can go through that. But another way of thinking of it is like your foot flat on the ground and your center literally traveling over the surface of the foot from one end to the other or from one side to the other.
Yeah.
And I've always really appreciated the way she explained that to me. And it's been really helpful and useful in the way I think about movement in West Coast swing. Random tangent. 68. Yeah, this is another one of yours, Alicia.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is there's like a minor level change as we're going into a very obvious level change. And you can see that because she's taking a really large step and then she is leaning away from Jordan. All right, so we have this large step and you can see that really her knees are kind of bending as she's going into that. So that's creating a little bit of a level change, but then she's also leaning kind of away from him and bending into that planted foot even more. So that's creating some of a level change, but then we get this very obvious level change right after it.
Very signature Kellese level change.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get there. I'll get there.
Yeah, and she really continues through with it. There's not really a stop in that movement.
Let there be light.
Yeah, right. I was framing through earlier today and there was just one frame that was just all pure white across the screen. I was like, oh, okay. I don't need to see that.
And that's what we experience as dancers. I will say that. That's why we say no flash photography.
Yeah.
Because if you're spinning and suddenly the whole world goes white for a split second,
not
bad
great
news.
Kind of hinders your ability to know where you're at in space.
A little bit. It's very helpful to know which way is up and which way is down.
Yeah. Okay, so you can really see that she continues that bend of the leg on her planted foot, her right leg, as she's just going down into this very obvious level change. All right, so we have right here, as she's coming around, she's starting to drop into that right leg. And she is using Jordan a lot to counterbalance her on there, so she doesn't have as much weight on her feet.
I will say though, Kellese is like 90% muscle. She is incredibly strong.
Yeah. She really is. I loved the detail of the dropping the top of the foot to the floor as she was rotating around. Not necessarily something that you have to do, but it can make things easier.
And it looks really nice.
Mm-hmm. It gives a little extra balance point. Without
strong upper thighs to escape it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you have an extra balance point without having the foot on the ground, which would kind of hinder that spin ability.
Mm-hmm.
This is more of a drag. And if she had the foot flat on the ground or, you know, something that wasn't just the top of the foot on the ground, it would create a lot more friction.
All right, this one's yours too, where she comes out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just looking at, really there's a lot of level change happening here because she's not just coming up out of it, but she's also coming up onto the toes, which adds an extra element to it. So then when she comes down here, there is quite a drastic change in that level, even though, you know, it's just lowering the heels. But just the way that she goes about this, it makes it look more dramatic than it is.
Mm-hmm.
She also has that lean forward,
Mm-hmm.
which really changes that level as well.
Yeah, I like how it gives the aesthetic that her knees are continuing to move upwards.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an illusion. Because like right here, she gets to her maximum height when she's actually airborne.
Yeah.
Then lands. But as she continues to pitch forward here and she bends her legs again, because the space between her torso and her knees is shrinking, it's creating a really fun illusion that she's almost floating.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that requires very strong legs and particularly use of the quadriceps, like you were saying earlier.
Yep.
This is another one of yours.
Yeah, just looking at the bend in the knees that happens throughout this. Because she starts her like one with a straight leg and she moves through that. And then as she moves through this redirect, like her knees get progressively more bent, more softened.
I also want to add, just as a side note, I love that Jordan is adding stability to the connection with that hand on her forearm.
Yeah.
Because if he weren't to have that there, this would be a very linear connection with a little bit of rotation added on. And that can become ambiguous depending on how the follow translates it.
Yeah.
But he wanted to remove ambiguity and he added that stability. So they not only have really linear prioritized connection here, but they have lateral connection here. And that just makes everything clearer and easier to lead and follow.
Yeah. It allows her to be able to shape her body a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because you can see she's really rotating into that. And so as he's kind of moving that elbow out, she is able to move into the arm.
And then he continues to use that because he stops her arm from rotating. So she opens up her right frame.
Yeah.
Is this the monkey bar of death?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we get this level change right here. And that's kind of the end of it, where she's really leaning away from him. And she has a lot of bend in the knees, even though the heels are up off the floor. That doesn't really matter because of how much bend she has in the knee and how much she is really leaning away from him, having that angle.
And then as they come back towards each other, Jordan isn't really getting that much taller, but because he's extending his spine just a little bit and raising his hands and lifting his foot, that gives the illusion of an upward level change for him as well. Here we go.
It's funny watching this at speed. It's like, how are we getting out of this? Because you're getting clotheslined as you're coming around here.
Right?
And she's continuing to fall to her left, which is the problem. If she wasn't continuing to rotate through it, it'd be fine. But because she's almost falling over his arm.
Yeah.
Which kind of creates a there's nothing that can move right around there. Yeah. Because of how she's kind of collapsing over his arm. So there's really not another way for her to get out of this other than to kind of swing up under him.
Yeah.
And she does a nice job of continuing that momentum that was starting to go left, right? So when we see here, she's starting to fall to the left, and she does a nice job of redirecting it. And so kind of allowing her upper body to fall backwards into his hand that he has connected to her. And just leaning into that is kind of resetting where her upper body is at.
And I really like how, even though probably right around here, she was like, oh no. Right? Because you have that out, I was like, But she chooses to finish that movement with her head right here.
Yeah.
And taking the time to be like, okay, this movement needs to resolve before we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
And then transitioning it, as opposed to suddenly magically stopping in the middle of momentum like this and being like, no, we're gonna get out of it here. And so that's really helpful. And I also want to highlight how Jordan is moving his left foot kind of back behind her center, so that way he can counterbalance her well.
Yep.
All right, so in this one, I just wanted to talk about the really lovely subtle pulse upward on count 5 of this whip. So we have 1, 2, my finger's going as fast as it can, 3, and almost there. 4. All right, here we go. And it's right here. They catch, and then it like comes up a little bit. It's more obvious at speed. It's like so subtle.
Yeah, it is. And you can really see that she's dropping into it, and she kind of has this like U motion that she goes through with her body.
Swing content. So then obvious level changes, the ones we probably always think about. Dips.
Yes.
I really love how long they choose to stay in this one.
I know.
I also highly approve of Jordan's choice to like look yonder into the distance.
It's a good choice. It is.
It's a good choice. Fabulous.
But I think that really how long that they do stay in this level change is something that makes the dance a lot more dynamic than if they had just kind of gone into it and been there for a couple beats and then come right back out. But they're choosing to continue it through this whole little section of the music.
Yeah.
And I love it because it also calms down the momentum of it and kind of chills out the dance to go with that section of the music where it does really like calm down a lot.
Yeah. And we're approaching the very end of the dance. So this was kind of like the final hurrah or whatever. So like when we went through Tebow and Nicole's showcase a few weeks back, we mentioned how each lift sequence escalated in complexity and length from the ones that came before. And so similarly, this moment is associated with that part of the song for this spotlight. And they escalated to this. If they had started out with this, where do you go from there? But this is where they ended up. So it's also excellent phrasing. And that's one of the ways you can consciously use level changes to be musical and to phrase.
Yeah. Erin asked, is she hanging on around his leg? She has her arm around his waist and he has a hand up under her shoulder armpit area.
Yeah, so you can see her hand up around his waist at one point.
Yeah, kind of when she's coming.
Right there. So her arm is going there. And then his hand, like Alicia said, is under her high upper arm. But I think her upper arm is also resting down on his leg. So it's
Yeah, it is.
multiple points of contact for stability.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of one dance that I was really grateful to see in person, Sea to Sky, some year in the last decade or so. Ben Morris drew Patty Vo, and they did a dip similar to this, where she was 100% holding on to his leg. So they were able to do an illusion where they kind of popped out of the dip an inch, and Ben would let go of one side of her, one shoulder of hers, and then switch back and forth. And it was a complete illusion, but it looked like he was tossing her up into the air and catching her again with his hand. It was a great illusion. And I think that one is on YouTube. And if I remember, I'll try to find it and link it in a card above for the replay. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about. So one of the simple ways to add a level change as a lead, because really for the leader's role, there is less opportunity for such high dynamic range level changes as a follow, because it's very rare that you're going to be dancing with a follow who could like support your body weight to do a monkey bar yourself. So one of the ways that you can add level changes is by doing a duck under the arm like this.
Mm-hmm.
I will say though, as a tall follow, I cannot tell you how many leaders have bashed their heads on my hip because they don't realize. Here,
you know what? I have also had that experience, and I am sure. So
I'm going to explain some physics. This is going to be the fun drawing of the evening. So we've got shorter leader, taller. Jeez Louise, sorry, don't hate me. Okay. So we have leader over here, follower over here. Leader has their hand at their lower back. Follower is like, oh my God. For them, because we're not Gumby, we have to be closer to be able to reach that distance comfortably, which means if you extrapolate this space of the leader's spine down,
Erin said I'm dying at how much closer Cassie is to the screen for this drawing.
I always forget you guys can see me. Anyways, because that never ends up in the replay, so I never see what I look like during these things, which is probably better for my sanity. I really want to post this on our page and be like, so, what were we explaining here? Yes.
It looks like a hot mess.
Yeah, among other things. Anyways, moving on.
So I wanted to mention that they have this like succession of level changes, because we start out from that dip, we come up, Jordan does level change, Kellese goes into a level change, and then I believe they do something else right out of it as well.
I believe you are correct. Another flash. Shakes head. I really love her casual free arm right there. She made that entrance into that one foot look so easy.
Yep. Very smooth.
Very nice.
Yeah, so we have this level change onto toes.
Bam.
I love it. So dramatic.
Yep. And she presses out of it so elegantly.
I know. So I like that we kind of had that exchange of level changes, and then we're going into just something that's casual, nothing too much happening right here.
Mm-hmm.
Because while level changes are great, don't put too many of them in.
Yeah. I don't think, even though we get the pendulum swing effect from a lot of level changes, I don't think it counts as swing content, which bothers me. Because physics, because I mean, that's what the hips do. That's like swing content 101 right there. But make your whole body do it, apparently no longer swing.
Erin said at that point it's leg day.
It's leg content.
So I think we're basically at the end here, and we have one little last change, but there's something that's a little bit different about this one because of the way that we're going about this. Mm-hmm. So what makes it a little bit different, you can see here, Kellese is going to go up onto her toes basically, and she really doesn't have too much of a change because of the way that she is releasing the hip behind her far enough. So because of that, her upper body is not doing too much of a drastic change, because if you were to tip forward at that same angle that she gets to, it would be quite more dramatic than what actually happens here.
Yeah, so you can see I turned on ghosting and her shoulders maybe got like an inch higher than they were. But if we back up and we look at her hips, oh, that's weird going backwards. Okay. But her hips start out down here.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I love watching Kellese so much, because she's so dynamic in her choices. She doesn't just think about moving her entire body as one piece. She thinks about leaving one piece stationary and letting the other piece move. And that opens up so much more room for play in your individual testing.
I also wanted to note that she does press up onto the toe that she has at some point throughout here.
Yeah.
So she's on her toes the whole time, but she's not actually pressing up out of it, but she does. And so we get a different line. So she has her feet quite a ways back, and then she settles that right heel as she comes up. And so that ends up in her actually pressing out of it and raising up.
Right here.
Yep.
It's very fast.
Yes. But then she drops right back down into those bent knees and swings the hips right back to the position they were in initially.
Yep. And, one last little thing I want to mention is Kellese is a really great example of having that dynamic in the body of constantly changing her pitch to make unique shapes and level change. But after she makes a shape, she makes sure to come back to home base, to her standard pitch as she's moving forward again, instead of staying in that bent over athletic pitch.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments, concerns?
I have a pseudo question, I guess. Given that Kellese is pretty bent in her knees, how important is it? Because some people you hear you have to have straight legs, and then some people you hear then you watch Kellese, or if you watch Jordan or whatever, they tend to have they're in their legs a lot. So I feel sometimes you hear one thing and then the people that win do something else. So I was wondering kind of what you on that is.
We're both smiling so hard because we're
I know.
We love this question. Alicia, you go first.
Okay, so that is something that is interesting because there are kind of two sets of leads and follows, and you have one that's more athletic and one that is more like focused on lines and whatnot. Not that they can't cross over, they do, but a lot of times I think that there is an emphasis on having lines, which is great. You want to have nice lines at certain points. And a lot of times that kind of snowballs into always having straight legs, straight lines, you know, and it becomes less dynamic. It's nice to look at, but, you know, there's not as much to play around with. And so I think that what is really happening is people are emphasizing different things, even though they are all playing around with both, but just not quite as much. There's not as much crossover. So with like Jordan and Kellese, because they are more athletic in the way that they dance, and, you know, they like playing around with things a lot, you know, different movements and whatnot. Like you have to be prepared for that, and prepared for being able to move underneath you a lot easier. You can't do that if you have straight legs. So that's why some of the dancers will, you know, have more bent legs, because they do play around with a lot more. That's my response.
Yeah. And then what I would add to that is, because I think we're all really familiar with how flat-footed dancing doesn't look very good, whereas dancing that rolls through the feet looks really good. Mm-hmm. You learn to extend that analogy up the leg into the hip. So the kind of chain reaction of rolling from the toe to the ball to the heel should continue to the knee to the hip. Mm-hmm. And making sure that your legs are alternating, unless you're very specifically doing a styling where both legs are supposed to move simultaneously. And I think part of the problem comes from newer dancers tend to not have that natural articulation all the way from the toe to the hip, which, by the way, creates the natural swing action, and is something we talked about last week. Someone mentioned how male-sexed bodies tend to have a harder time with hip action. But really, hip action comes from the knees and the feet. And it's a result of offsetting the height of your hips through your feet and your knees. And I was going somewhere with that. But so newer dancers tend not to have that articulation. So they have that like flat-footed effect, but through their whole leg, and they're stuck in a bent position. So if that makes any sense, we just see this like flat foot, bent knee, and it just stays like that as it goes, as opposed to a leg that's fully finishing the movement all the way up into the hip. So when you have the technique to finish that movement through the hip, your baseline bent knees can be whatever you choose. They can be more straight, like Brandy, or they could be more into the knees like Kellese, because they're both functioning from a similar technique that finishes the movement through the hips. That's the smartest thing I've said all day.
I think basically it's that, you know, because newer dancers start out with not straight legs, a lot of the focus becomes on having straight legs, because you do need to create those lines at certain points, but then there never is a coming out of that, playing around with it.
Yeah. And it's very contrary. And this is something, another soapbox. Let's finish on this soapbox for the year. This would be good. Whenever, like, I understand the purpose behind using this to teach newer dancers. I understand it. I get it. But I also disagree with it when they say just walk. Because human locomotion is physics-based. It's controlled falling, and it's about striking with a straight leg and then catching on a bent leg. And that's the opposite of dancing. We want to catch on a bent leg and finish on a straight leg in dancing. And that's what allows you to have the control. And there are times when you bring out the human locomotion because it has a certain effect, like when we did our episode on Larissa and Glenn Ball. She did a really great swagger kind of skip towards the end of that dance. And that was her having more of like catching a fall, and the break was, and it finished on a bent leg. But that has a very specific look, and you need to use it intentionally. Whereas as dancers, we want to land on a bent leg and finish it straight instead of what normal walking is. Oh. You wanna add anything to that while we're here?
I think so.
Okay.
I will let that be your last soapbox.
Cool. I got so many more. That's why we have this show. It's great times. That'd be a funny New Year's thing. Maybe next year we could plan a New Year's where we just rant. Well, thank you for joining us tonight and for helping this become a thing that we now do. This is our 37th episode, our last episode of 2020. We will be back with a live episode January 7th. The next recording will be the following Sunday. I believe we're doing Blast from the Past, looking at some older videos. If you were here for our Austin Coyce episode and he turned into Austin, the YouTube DJ, it'll have a similar feel to that. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. May the force be with you. We will see you next year. Yeah, bad knees and West Coast swing do not mix, but unfortunately, so many of us have this affliction.
Yeah.
It's like we're dance masochists.
Strange.
Also, super random story. This will be for the outtakes, but it's our Christmas episode. Might as well share now. We're a small group. I have like dance event nightmares, and like some people have school nightmares, right? Like when I was a kid, I had school nightmares. When I was in college, I had school nightmares. When I grew up, it just became dance event nightmares. So I'll dream of like, oh, I forgot to sign up for my comp. Oh, I'm late for my comp. Oh, I can't tie my shoe. Like awful things. But last night, I dreamt that Benji was very invested in helping me with my anchor. It was just like super specific, super random, felt really real. And here's the annoying part. If like there was a really profound moment, I'm like, oh. And then when I woke up, I couldn't remember what it was. Of course. So probably wasn't actually relevant to my dancing, but I'm still like, oh, what was it? Anyways, story time over. I'm still not as good as Chris.
Is Chris knocking over things around him?
And he does the whole like across the screen thing. Sure. Oh no, I get to start us out because it's my note first.
Yes, it is.
I had a very long day, people. I've got a very interesting amount of hyper that is a result of being exhausted. Body roll portion. I will get there eventually, I swear. 60 frames per second video is my Achilles heel on this show.
Great quality, but
I know. They're so smooth, but they're so slow. Oh, I know what it is. No, man. I'm going to start over for the recording because I am dumb. I told you I was exhausted. I had a keyframe for when the dance started, and I thought that's where my note was, but no, the next keyframe was my note.
Oh.
Thank you for all being patient with me. And so one of the ways Jordan styles is it. Why did I add an S? Wow. Okay.
No.
Now I'm imagining a speed walking versus moonwalking competition at Swingtacular for some reason. I'm imagining some like Jordan moonwalking and John O'Connell speed walking racing each other.
That would be interesting.
I need this in my life. Somebody call Ben McHenry. We need to do a video about Courtney. Anyways, moving on. I am so tired. My executive functions are special right now. I'm like, ooh, squirrel.
Aaron asked, any way to bind the framing to the middle mouse wheel?
You are assuming I have a mouse, sir. I have a laptop. Also, that wouldn't be quite as fine tuning because sometimes I do want to be like just one frame. Because sometimes we get nerdy enough to actually draw ghosted frames on here so we can track things.
Yes.
It also gives me something to do, so I'm not too nervous. If I think too hard about what we're doing, I'll get nervous. So this is like my fidget. And it provides ample comedic relief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I say that because I watch these all the way through when I'm editing. So that's really just a reminder to myself to go do it now. Future me. Time travel. Woo! I told you I was nuts tonight. It's
you know what? That's okay. I'm
cool. All right, what on earth frame are we on? Oh man, I had an unfortunate run-in with a glass coffee table yesterday. I was telling Alicia about this earlier. And I have like a 5-inch deep bruise, like jagged line bruise across the outside of my left knee. Yeah, it's pretty. It's one of those I'm like, wow, should I record this for posterity, like pics, or it didn't happen? Bad jokes. Do we have any last bad jokes of 2020? Got it? Got any salt for Santa? I don't know. Someone should take my license to speak at this point.
That's funny.
I'm gonna sip some of my ginger soda. I should train in blues and salsa. I have, sir. My oh man, I have genetic hypermobility, so my Cuban motion is kind of off the hook, but also literally because I would dislocate my hip during rumba. It was not fun. And
My
also,
I meant the penguin walking.
Oh, the penguin walking.
It would help with the penguin walking.
Yes, I love doing Charlie Chaplin, like extreme turnout, very straight legs, and pretending I'm swinging a cane. It's one of my favorites.
Nice.
Northern California.
That's funny.
The last episode, huh?
Was the first year.
Yeah, like the last. It sounds good to be like it's the last episode of 2020 because
season 1.
I'd call it more than a season.
I don't know. That's a solid season. That's like
37. Usually it's like 22 to 24 episodes.
Like I think we've had 2 breaks, so they were like 3 podcast seasons. Because I think we're more of a podcast than a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we're a podcast with pixels.
That should be your new slogan. Podcast with pixels.
Podcast with pixels.
I like it. I don't know. I think it's because like you kind of have to if it's a dance podcast if you're showing stuff. I mean, other people have podcasts.
Yeah,
it works because they're just discussing. Not
okay. Where the anchors? Okay, a podcast with pickles. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. This is what it sounds like. I actually said that. What? Wow, I did not.
Yeah, I'm impressed.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. A podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. Boy, that one's going to be a mouthful.
I'd love to hear you say it.
All right.
In 2021, that should be your opening line.
We're adding little bits of branding.
It's just like an hour long of just branding.
Intro.
That's funny.
I should have like a prop monocle for when I'm going to get soapboxy. And I can just be like, well, kids, I have been up too long today and yesterday.